Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our online lunch seminar or webinar, this time with our friend and colleague and very, very lovely woman we like very much to talk with, Julia Roig. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, Susan. Nice to be with you. For me, it's to say good morning, nice and early in the morning here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, we will talk about America. So this is good to mention that you are on the East Coast. So it's morning for you, it's afternoon for us, and the why we asked you for this talk is that we feel somehow that things are changing rapidly around in a matter of democracy development, civil society development. Some things are horrifying, but some things may be even, generating some kind of hope. And we always look at the US because whether we like it or not, some trends from the US are soaking into Europe and also in Slovakia. So that's why I would love to talk with you about what do you think, how the situation with civil society, social polarization, social cohesion in the US is going on, because of course we see only tiny part here in the normal news in Slovakia. So how it is from your perspective, and what we can extrapolate that maybe will influence us more or less. And I only add that Julia is wonderful trend seeker, and she knows these things usually very, very, very well to see, to she has a nose for trends. So this is just a little advertisement.
This is a nice metaphor, isn't it? A nose for trends I'll be thinking of.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I miss all of you so much, and the excuse to be with my friends at the Partners Network. I mean, it's been a blessing, though, for me to be able to really focus on the conflict dynamics and democratic challenges we have in the United States over the last year and a half. And I mean, I guess what I would say first of all is, how we define the problem in the United States is actually central to our challenge right now. So you asked about social cohesion and about the trends of what's happening with regards to maybe the democratic decline, shall we say? And I think that there's a couple of bright spots. Let's start with the bright spots, is that so many more people are aware that there's a problem and getting involved now more than ever. Really, we've had higher voter turnout than we've ever had. We have more young people getting engaged. We have a lot of, just a sense that for a long time there was an American exceptionalism that we were the United States and we were selling democracy around the world, and there's a real sense, for a lot of different reasons, that we need to work harder for our democracy in the United States. Now, of course, there's a lot of apathy, there's a lot of people who are staying on the sidelines because they're so tired of the polarization, the fighting, the drama, the politics that don't work very well. But really one of the bright spots is how many more people care. Yet the definition of the problem, I think, is what we're really struggling with right now. Is now, of course, there's enough work for everyone to do. It's a big country, it's very diverse. But one of the things that I think we're trying to figure out is it's not just working for social cohesion. actually. There's a whole bunch of other things we need to work on, but we can talk more
I
about that.
see. I see. Maybe let's start from something like, I know that this may seem like very silly question because the United States is a huge country and extremely diverse country, but still, are there some topics which are like now really like on really discussed, and I felt like urgent these days? Would it be political or social or something that is really common when people meet, regardless education, regardless race? What they talking about?
Yeah. I mean, I am a little bit in my bubble, right? I'm in Washington, D.C. We talk about these things about democracy all the time, but I would say the culture wars are really first and foremost on people's minds. And so, whether it's issues of abortion, whether it's issue of gay rights and transgender rights, whether it's issues of how we're grappling with a history of slavery and all of the books that certain states have decided are not, are either pornographic because they talk about gay issues, or harmful for children because they talk about our history of slavery. There's a lot of discussions about these types of culture wars. And on the other side, there's a talk about just woke culture. Do you know what this means? This is
No.
it's a very US term, and it comes out of actually an African American tradition of being awakened. You are awake if you understand what the problem is. But then that got turned into a woke. And it's a way of saying that the left has gone too far to police the culture on the liberal side. So if you're not liberal and progressive enough, then you're woke. And now, so that's a criticism of actually shutting down speech. Freedom of speech is so important to the United States. We talk about this constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk a lot about whether it's on college campuses, that there's this concept of being too woke. You're too awake, and you're forcing everyone to live your liberal values. And so there's been a very big pushback against that. So I would say the cultural issues are more on people's minds, partially because it's a distraction tactic, in my view, not to talk about the real issues like economic justice and climate change and the things that we need to be spending our time talking about.
And let me, maybe it's speculation, but isn't it also because the world is shaking so much for many people that they are kind of feeling uneasy with the very basic stuff? I usually say that things are different than when what we have learned at kindergarten. It's not true anymore, right? Like we were discussing some time ago, Thanksgiving Day. And this is something I feel that is just now starting more massively being like questioned, that what is it actually about, and whether it is really something to celebrate, and what kind of messages are in this holiday inside for Black people, for colorful people, for Indigenous Americans. And this is something hard for people, right? Because the changes are so like everywhere that the necessity to grasp at least something what would be like, steady, and I can hold it for a while. This necessity may be very urging for some people.
Yeah. And I think this is probably something that we share across the Atlantic. We share everywhere in the world, because of the pandemic, because of just the globalized nature of the change that we have. I couldn't agree with you more. There's a good reason that these issues around just feeling fearful and the trauma of coming out of the pandemic, but not just that, the really fast pace of change. So, you know, on the other side, everybody's talking about AI. I mean, honestly, what we talk about a lot is just how AI is going to influence our lives, our jobs. You know, we used to think it was robots that were going to come and take the factory jobs. That when you thought about automated systems, you were worried about kind of factory workers, you know, but now we're talking about all sorts of different things. And so whether it's confusion about gender roles and wanting to go back to a time where things were simpler, you know, we have I don't know if you do this in Slovakia, but it's just a normal thing that we do where when you introduce yourself in a meeting, you share your pronouns now. And this is in solidarity with those who maybe, you know, wouldn't want to be the one to have to say, no, I use this other pronoun. So in every meeting, everyone shares their pronoun. This is like a norm for us. And of course, this feels strange to some folks. And so I do think that part of the reason that we're focusing so much on the changing culture is because, like you said, it's one of the one things. But also, Zuza, let's be honest that there are politicians that we think of as conflict entrepreneurs who are fueling the flames of this fear and making people remember that they you know should be upset about these changes.
Yeah, and maybe if we still coming back to the topics which people really feel like urgent and except of these cultural things, is there climate change an issue? Because I know that in Europe we are much more involved in this also because of various European politics, and it is very, very present in politics, in economics, in many reforms. Whether we like it or not, we have to discuss it. But how is it in the US? Is it still like, oh, maybe it's not existing and we don't know and maybe we will see, or how is it? Does it is it changing a little bit, or?
Yeah, it has to change, first of all. And second of all, it will change because the younger generation won't allow for us to ignore it anymore. And so there's definitely a generational divide, both good and bad. I mean, the organizing, I don't know if you know, we have the Sunrise Movement, a huge movement of climate change and environmental activists that are mostly led by young people who are very active and organizing. And so where the most kind of, let's say, innovation and attention that's happening is at the state level. And so states like California, you know, and these are more Democrat, liberal states, there's a lot that is happening with regards to regulations and the conversation, investing in clean technologies. But we see a huge pushback because this is one of the issues that the far extreme right in our country has really taken up. And, you know, there's standards of investing in clean energy of investment firms that have these criteria. I don't know if you talk so much about ESG, environmental, social, and governance indicators for how a company is performing. And this is a huge topic now. Everyone's talking about ESG, but they're talking about it from the right as being, again, woke capital,
yeah.
but also being unfair. And you know, I try and engage with this topic, you know, because it's not all evil people who just want to pollute the planet and who want,
Yes.
you know, they truly believe that these indicators, this framework that has been put forward for companies and their keeping track of the investment is applied like a blanket to every type of company, every industry. And so then then they get ranked by who has the best ESG ranking. And that actually this isn't fair. It doesn't work. It's a lot of window dressing. And that these
greenwashing probably, because
yes, exactly. And more greenwashing. And so unfortunately, we don't engage in the actual substance of how we should change the standards and make it apply in the right way we just get all upset, that this ESG, but that's a huge topic that everyone's talking about now. And that there's big fights with the extreme right and different companies who take a stand for these social issues or environmental issues. So I have hope, because I do think that companies are standing up. Actually, there's a lot being written right now saying it makes good business sense for us to be on the cutting edge of the innovation for the pro-environment type. So we can't go backwards. And so there's tension.
Yeah, but this is also one thing what we can also discuss from the point of view of American way of life, right? This old-fashioned from the President Bush and even President Reagan, who said that nobody would say Americans how they should live their lives. And this is also something like a cultural change, which is necessary. That is not just another standard we put on companies, but it's another standard on quality of life we put on ourselves and on our surrounding. So I'm just interested whether also this kind of discussion is somehow started, or is it just, very, very like at the beginning right now?
Yeah, it's not at the beginning. And in fact, there's so many bright spots and good stories of innovation. And I can't remember which airport it is. It's either Dallas or Houston. One of the airports in Texas is one of the most green airports, actually.
Wow.
Has made a huge effort, and we don't know about the efforts that are being told. And there's a wonderful woman, I'll see if I can find the link so I can send it to you, Zuzov, of someone who is working very hard within the traditional kind of Christian, evangelical, conservative world to talk about climate change a lot. And she talks about, why it's good for the country, why it's good. But then she also talks about all the bright spots. I have a friend who has a really good metaphor, which I love this metaphor for all the work we do, but for climate change in particular, is that if you think that we're like at the bottom of the hill with a big rock and we're trying so hard to push the rock up the hill and all this effort, and it's so hard, she says, that's not what's happening right now with our climate change and climate adaptation. We're actually at the top of the hill, and the big rock is rolling down the hill with all of these wonderful efforts. We just need more hands to push the rock down faster. And I think that's a better way of thinking about it, because that it's the truth.
Yeah, I was reading a lot about it, because conservative circles and also many political groups, they are saying that nature conservation as such is a conservative value, that they just maybe look at it from a little bit different angle. But there are things that can be connecting, and maybe I can say one fancy thing about Slovakia, that there was a big survey in last summer, like about identities, and Slovak people were given, people living in Slovakia, they were given various types of identities, like Slovak, Catholic, mother, parent, I don't know, many. And there was one identity which won in percentages, in absolute numbers, all over other identities. And it was, guess what? nature conservatist.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well,
So
you also have a beautiful country with a lot of access to wonderful
yeah,
nature, so I can see
but it
that.
was, even voters of right-wing parties,
Yes.
they were identifying themselves with the nature and the conservation and the protection of nature. So I am just, wondering all the time that maybe this could be the connecting moment of this kind of discussion, not the alternative energies and various types of businesses and how
Yeah.
to produce energy, because this is very complicated and there are many interests which are against each other. But to find something what would be the common idea, and you can have patriotism there, you can have liberal values there, you can have many things like one next to each other or together. So I was just wondering, is there any issue like this still, at least in some communities in the United States, as far as you know, this kind of connecting examples, connecting issues or
Yes.
uh,
Um,
narratives? Because yeah, you taught me,
yes.
and I know what is narrative thanks to you.
Um, I mean, it's interesting. Once again, I do think that young people more than anyone, so there's an identity of a generational identity
Mhm.
that I think is very strong. And when you poll young people, climate change is on the, very, very high on their list. It's interesting. We're struggling in the US right now with young people, unfortunately, also having a sense of fatalism that it's not going to get better. So while I'm saying there's a lot of activism, there's, so much organizing, it's exciting. And at the same time, some of the mental health issues we have of young people has been directly tied, not necessarily to social media. We talk about social media and mental health for youth all the time. There's a bunch of studies that show it's actually a sense of dread for the future and, not getting married, not wanting to have kids, so we have to address that. And I'm sorry, I'm not answering the question, but I'm telling you more what I'm a little worried about, that the identity of caring about the environment has really seeped into our polarization. So
Mm.
meaning we're so fragmented with regards to the types of cars that we drive, the clothes that we wear, the things that we post on social media, the things that we talk about. And so then therefore, sometimes being an environmentalist, it is a part of a liberal identity. And I think that we're doing exactly what you're talking about now, Zuzа, is that we're finding ways of, and like I said, this woman who does a lot of her outreach within more conservative communities, how we find that I think it's less about the climate change. I think, in my opinion, it's more now about finding the ways of the future identity of the future of the United States.
Yes,
Really.
this
This
is
is what,
something which very interesting also for me, whether there are some newly formulated narratives of the future, because sometimes I have impression here, especially in Europe, that we are kind of afraid of being like really looking to the future, with courage, that we say that, oh, okay, we want to live like now but better. But really, to reformulate, what does it mean good life? What does it mean good quality of life? Does it mean HDP? I mean, what does it mean this type of economy we have? uh, what does it mean that what we want to have in the future in this earth? I mean, people, nature, society, families, all together. Whether there some discussions interesting of this kind.
yeah. So I have to tell you, this is a trend that is everywhere in my world, and it's more like the social change industry, let's call ourselves, but is all of the futures thinking, beyond scenario planning, right? I mean, a lot of us during the pandemic, we realized we needed to do more scenario planning. We needed to like project ourselves out and be prepared. This is something different. This is imagination skills.
Yeah.
This is really like interrogating your relationship with the future. And in fact, we just did this really nice exercise with a colleague at a university, at George Mason University. And the exercise, I'll tell you really quickly, because it was interesting. It's called developing an artifact from the future. So just even if you think like it could be 10 years from now, it could be 50 years from now, like what is the artifact? Like what's the thing that you think will be a part of your life? And then you say, okay, well, then it's like, what does it feel like? You'd go through the whole kind of meditation about living in that future. And then we sent out a survey to like 800 different people, because then there was a scenario where the artifact from the future was present. And then how did you see yourself in that future? How did it feel? And how would you act then differently from how you'd act now? So it's a whole
Wow.
way of talking about what you're doing now. But it's just, there's a whole bunch of little exercises. I would tell you who is doing some fantastic work is UNESCO from the UN. They have a whole curriculum on futures literacy and different exercises that you can do. And I find this really exciting. And of course, it's both and, because we have to deal with our history in the past, but we also need to use the future more. And sorry, I'm going to tell you one more metaphor, because this is another one of a colleague of mine in Florida. Her metaphor is that you know what a slingshot is? Like David and Goliath. He took the rock back, he let go of the rock, and it hit Goliath in the head. This is the slingshot. And she said, we're feeling so much tension right now because of the way that society is changing. And it's like we're being pulled back in the slingshot. But you know what's happening? We're actually going to go much farther into a better future.
Wow.
Because we're experiencing this tension. And I feel that way. I feel like it feels almost like we're going to break the tension as so challenging, but we will get through it. And in fact, we'll probably be in this better future. So some people feel this. There's a criticism that there's a lot of white people, a lot of white men engaging in futures thinking. And if you're Black in America, brown in America, you don't really have the luxury of thinking so much about the future, because your life is really a struggle right now. And so thank you very much. Can you please help me right now to address the injustices? And I don't want to, but at the same time, and this is the last thing that I'll say, is we were working with a group in Latin America on narratives, these future narratives. How can we get feminists to think about this new world? And it was an exercise in developing this external communication. But our colleagues who were doing this work with their activist community, their movements, said the biggest benefit was actually the women they were working with to feel a sense of hope. So it wasn't just an external exercise, it was that they could see this future. And I think that that's important for all of us. And there's a lot of African futurists that are writing science fiction and really spending a lot of time helping us think through what is possible.
Yeah, and that's the important thing also, to include in the future people who usually, as you said, they don't even imagine that there is any future for them. They don't have time for it. They are so preoccupied of their very existential problems that they just don't have this opportunity to just stay for a while and think about it. And that's another type of future than just when rich and privileged people will draw something for themselves. So
Yeah.
that's fantastic. And let's get back a little bit to the polarization, because
Mm.
your organization, which is Horizon Project, is doing a lot of effort in somehow trying to find the narratives of depolarization or connection or about the future. But what we heard here, and we hear it every day, that okay, the US is extremely polarized country and is not getting better after Trump, because before everybody was blaming Trump for extreme polarization, but now it's going on. So is there any kind of hope, or how, I mean, yeah, how to deal with it? I mean, is from the democratic and political development, because in polarized, this is something we also now are discussing in Slovakia, because today we just lost our uh, temporary government, so we have now government of experts, which is not even not yet formed, but we also are facing extreme polarization, extreme cultural wars, and some people say that this is very dangerous because it's very difficult to formulate policies, even practical, not even the very future, whatever visions, but very practical policies, because everywhere, whatever you start to talk about, everywhere is polarization. So how to be with this?
Yeah. So, it's interesting, Susan, when we first started the Horizons Project, we did think a lot about the problem of polarization. And because I work so closely with Maria Stefan as the co-lead at Horizons, who's a scholar of authoritarianism and civil resistance, I've really changed my own analysis of seeing polarization as a symptom as opposed to the problem that we're trying to solve. It doesn't make it any less painful and difficult. It just means that we have to think about it as a system of, okay, why is it that we're polarized and who is polarizing us? Because there is agency on, who's benefiting from us being so polarized. And so then, of course, then the actions that we would prioritize aren't to address the symptom, but to address the cause of the symptom. So what I mean by that is there's a huge growth of a lot of dialogue programs in the United States, where we just need to have more empathy for each other. We need to understand where each other is coming from. We need the Democrats and the Republicans to sit and share a meal. And I really am feeling that these programs are not enough, but actually could even be causing more harm because of the way that we convene people. I talked about this a little bit with you guys before, that I'm just really rethinking. Now, what does this mean, though? It doesn't mean to not do it. It means to do it, to bring people together. I still don't think the red hats and the blue hats, because that we say this as a like a euphemism. If you're wearing the blue hat, you have the Democratic leaning. If you have the red hat, you have so if you invite people to the dialogue based on their ideological or political position, you're entrenching this position. You're making it even stronger. And so a lot of the research, and we know this from around the world, it's, contact theory, is that you have to give people something to do together to sustain the relationship and the sense of agency. And so we're much more interested in communities organizing against the rising populism, against the dehumanization, which of course is on the right and the left. We have to police our own dehumanizing language, meaning we can't be engaging in so much othering. Every Trump supporter is a racist. well, this is not true, and we shouldn't talk like
Exactly.
that, actually. It's not helpful. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't be organizing to say, we absolutely don't want politicians who are pushing us farther apart. And we should be organizing. So have the dialogues, but then get organized to actually engage and fight against the groups that are working to polarize us in a toxic manner or dividing us. Because, you know, what I'm learning now too, Susa, is that a little bit of polarization is healthy, because we have to get people to pick we had a big conversation. This literally just happened this weekend. There's an old song from the civil rights movement called "Which Side Are You On?"
Yes.
And we just sang it around the campfire at a group that we got together of trainers and facilitators. And that phrase went out to a group, inviting them to come to the launch of a strategy of one of the organizations. Which side are you on? And people said, this is so polarizing. You're dividing us. This is fighting language. And you know, we actually need a little bit of the fighting, I think, now. We don't need dehumanizing, and we don't need toxic othering. But there's a legacy from Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, which is to raise the heat. So,
but fighting with the people who are in power. I mean,
exactly,
for something,
right.
Not against the other group of citizens, right? That maybe this civil rights or human rights we have in Europe, this language of human rights is very on time and is very current when we talk to the government, when we talk to the politicians, to the people who pretend to represent or really want to represent. Honestly, doesn't matter. It's really necessary to stand up and fight, but not to fight against each other, right?
I know this is so hard. So I have to say, then this means that some of our activism, our advocacy, the way that we organize, and, you know, this is a lot of the research we've done on narratives, is anger and outrage motivates in the short term. And it gets people either to come to the streets, it gets them to do an activation, sometimes it helps them vote, but in the long term, it's tearing us apart, of course. And so we really need to find, this is a very difficult topic, because with a lot of the communities we work with, righteous anger, we say, we deserve to be angry. Don't you dare tell me not to be angry.
Yes.
And they're like, okay, yes. And I actually, there's no way, especially me as a white woman, whom am I going to say to people, a very privileged white woman, you know, don't be so angry. We just need to create the spaces where the anger lives, and the grief and the hurt and the outrage, so that then we organize in a way where we're creating spaces for repair. We talk about this a lot, repair. We have to repair our society. And I used to call it restorative advocacy, be advocating in a way that restores our social fabric. Some people don't like this so much because the words matter, right? So restore means almost like we're going back to something. Like, let's just restore it.
Restore something what already have been destroyed or whatever, but it was here before.
So now we call it reparative. And we need to resist, and we need to organize, but we need to do it in a way that has this vision of our pluralistic democracy in the future, or maybe something new. But the pluralism has to be there. So there will be conservatives in our future and progressives, and we all have this space.
Yeah. And what about the word regenerative? Because in Europe, sometimes it's linked to climate change policies, but also, for example, Finnish government has it in their official documents for the future, regenerative economy, in relation to nature, but also into the society. And this is also something I like very much, that we need to regenerate from the pandemic, from the various traumas we were going through, and and include others, include the variety of people and also variety of other species we share with.
Can I say one quick thing about why I think the word repair is so important in the US context? Is we've been doing a lot of work on what does societal healing look like? How do we heal? And if you take some of the truism from restorative justice, for example, or some of the truth and reconciliation processes around the world in post-conflict, you have to have truth-telling, and you have to have accountability in order to get to the part where there's repair and reconciliation. And we as a society are really struggling with having that conversation about a history of slavery, a history of colonization of Indigenous people. And this is, Susan, I think the reason there's such a strong pushback right now, that we've got the book bannings and we've got, you know, all of the horrible legislation of not allowing us to talk about it, is because actually I think the agenda of racial healing and transformation is winning in the United States. We are making so much progress that this is why there's the pushback that we have.
I'm sorry, we just reloading our computer.
No, it's okay. I just want to say we're not necessarily regenerating right now in the United States. It'd be nice if we were there.
Healing is also very, very accurate term, and also repairing. Yeah, I understand that this is something, but I mean, this is also, it brings me to another interesting thinking or narrative, that we start to value more in our society care and healing, and you know, instead of producing, instead of things being created and produced, we start to think about repairing things, people, minds, society, communities, families, and this is also a beautiful mind shift. And some people say that it's good for climate, because care is very very like carbon dioxide lowering, right? That you don't produce, you don't fill the planet with another useless stuff, but you just repair what is already good and what you think you would like to do in the future. But also we discuss about care for elderly people, for our children, as for, you know, as you mentioned, the psychiatric problem, mental health problem of various generations, but especially young people, that we really need to convert our thinking from producing and competing in production to care.
Yeah.
And reparation.
Absolutely. And, you know, I have seen a shift since the pandemic, but also the Black Lives Matter movements, that there has been an acknowledgement that self-care and giving grace to others, being in these smaller communities of care, is a form of activism.
Ah,
There's there's something, there's this wonderful I not even an organization, I want to say influencer, and it's called the nap ministry. So this idea, like we all just need to take more naps. I know that's not what you're talking about, but actually it's true. And we need to take care of each other, but I find that these smaller communities of care, which we've lost, but we're trying to rebuild again, is a priority of our activism for both democracy, for social change, for climate change, is finding these very local spaces or even your national spaces to just be together in different ways and not so busy. But honestly, Susan, what you're talking about is a shift away from capitalism.
yes, yes,
I mean,
yes.
this is, and let's be honest, we can't reform democracy if it's not tied to a reform of capitalism. We can't. And these are big, hard conversations that sometimes seem too big. So then at least we can start with the smallest group of a caring community and how we care for each other.
I'm happy you mentioned that directly, because here in Slovakia also, within the circles of civil society organizations, there was this kind of reflection that here, especially in post-communist space, people are very reluctant to criticize capitalism, because immediately when you criticize capitalism, you are pushed into some kind of Bolshevik extreme, whatever,
Marxist, yeah.
conservative, but conservative in a sense of, Leninism and something what we already had here. And also the arguments are sometimes like, oh yes, we had here communism already, it didn't work, so you don't criticize what we have now because we are now like well off, and something like this. So this is also very interesting, like, shift of mindset, that criticizing capitalism doesn't mean that we want the old style communist regime, which was actually, in my opinion, very capitalistic.
Yeah.
In a sense of production, in a sense of dealing with people's lives. So though it was called communism, I am very much convinced that it was on capitalistic rules and basis of international economy, and then and this whole international setup was made on the same kind of understanding that, yes, let's produce more, let's extract from other countries what we can, and let's extract other nations as much as we can, and let's compete east and west, and let's compete in how much cosmonaut we have in the space, and let's compete in this this kind of stuff, but not with the real quality of life people have in down parts of the societies. So yeah,
I mean,
this
sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, in the US, we have a slightly different phenomena that I know you probably are very aware of, but we're so, this concept of the American dream, and if you work hard, you'll get ahead. This is so strong with us, even though it's so not true. But so then we have these celebrity billionaires like Elon Musk, for example.
Yes. He's a good example, actually.
Well, but there's this cult of personalities, but this idea, if you work hard and you deserve it, and so anything is possible. And of course, there's a lot of stories of people starting from very, poor beginnings, who worked hard, and this is really strong in our psyche. So that even criticizing the rich or criticizing the system that allows people to be so obscenely wealthy, it goes directly against this story. So I think it's one of these moments, with the narrative science, like, okay, don't criticize it directly, because we can't convince people not to think this way. It's so deep in our culture that we then have to paint the new picture.
Yeah.
where there's we paint the new picture. This is where the future thinking comes in, of course. And a lot of people are going to fight this change, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does it mean for us? Actually, some people talk about being like a doula for the future. You know what a doula is? It's the women who helped give the childbirth.
Yes.
Or the other metaphor is like the hospice care, like a way of life is dying. And there are people that in hospice who accompany the dying people, but they do it with care, not with outrage. But we need the people who are going to help the old way of life change, and those who are going to struggle and actually lose out a little bit, away their mind frame, maybe their substantive way of life, the privilege we have as white people, when actually we're going to be more and more brown and black. And when my kids are, adults and they have their kids, we will not be the majority in this country. And we've never, where is there a country in the world where there was a majority that eventually became the minority? Where has that happened, really, without some kind of civil war? But so one of the messages that we have, and a lot of young people who are organizing say this has never been done before, what we're about to do, but we can do it because we're Americans. We can shift, we can be a pluralistic, multiracial democracy. We're about to celebrate 250 years of being a country. This is coming up in just a couple of years, our 250th anniversary birthday party. So there's a different way of like approaching this, as opposed to just saying like, you rich people are robbing us. So, and you're evil. I think it gets people to vote in the next election. So a lot of the political pollsters spend a lot of time sharing the message about the wealthy few who are taking advantage of us and they're corrupt. And so then it gets people to the polls to vote for a particular party. But I think it doesn't help us with the shifting the worldview that we need.
Because it's again fight against some group of people, right? Is again this combating and fighting narrative, like we are combating everything, right? That this is also maybe a problem of last decades, that we combat racism, we combat COVID, we combat I don't know, all problems we frame with this combative narrative, and I think it's not good, because then it is what you just said, that always some people feel that they will lose, and they will fight against and they will defend their values, their way of life, and it is really something we don't want, because it's
so it's interesting. I've learned again from the narrative science, a good story always has conflict. And there's always an enemy in the good story, because you got to fight to get to, because there's the tension and the hero's journey, or there's the group that comes together, like the Lord of the Rings. Do you know what I'm talking about? Tolkien. But one person comes from here and one person comes from here, and the group comes together, but then they have to fight the thing. So the trick is, we do need the stories that are compelling and that people see themselves in the stories, but we can craft it so that we're hopefully there's a good storytelling about like the system that we're trying to change, where you actually feel a sense of agency, you feel inspired, you're going to get to the other side, but being very conscientious about how and when we say things and what kind of ironic effects are there. So this is what
Yes.
we're talking about. Like, you didn't intend half the population to get even more entrenched in their individualism. So the constant reevaluation of the ironic effects of what we're putting out there in the world, but understanding that good storytelling always has the enemy and the conflict, but doing this in a way that isn't the toxic othering like we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Conflict is part of our lives, and we know it very well in our partners network, and we work with it. Yeah, but the question is how to frame it and how to transform it such a way that is clear, but at the same time it doesn't create much more conflict while dealing with the conflict. Maybe I would now, Lutka, if there are some questions from people who are either on Facebook or here with us on Zoom, that we can leave a space for some other people to ask, not just me.
There are no questions yet, but maybe after you just pronounce it, somebody will ask.
Please, whoever, if you like to ask something within this framework, or whatever you are interested in democracy and civil society in the US, we'll be happy to have your question. You can write it down into the chat in Facebook or in Zoom if you are with us in Zoom. So Luti, you will take care of it. So just let me know. And in the meanwhile, I would maybe try to again, coming back to the US and the Europe. So from your perspective, Julia, is there anything what is now happening in Europe you find inspirative for you? People who are engaged in democracy and civil society development in the US?
Yeah. Well, honestly, some of the most exciting imagination activism, I think, is happening more in Europe, and the Futures Institute in Helsinki. So we look to Europeans for a lot of the work on the futurism. The other thing, though, I think is, again, you're living through a war on your continent right now, and so these discussions about kind of the impact of the big geopolitics and really experiencing this authoritarianism, this regime that is without the consent of its people, dragging the whole continent into war. The way that I think that we've seen people respond both to the refugee crisis and the solidarity with Ukraine, I think that there's a direct experience now. And I know this isn't easy as everything's drawn on. I mentioned recently at a conference that two things can be true at once. So we see the solidarity and it's inspiring. And there's so many parts of the world that say, there was this racialized aspect of why the world came together for Ukraine and not other parts of the world. And so we're having this conversation too about solidarity with other causes. But we do look at the way, and I know that Slovakia is really, especially in Eastern Slovakia, has had to take up a lot of the responsibility, actually, of having a conflict right on your border. And we are experiencing this. It's just not the same type of conflict, so that it's so clear, because what's happening in Latin America, the real crisis of violence in Central America, and the undemocratic nature of Venezuela and all of the people who are fleeing. We have a huge migration crisis, but we're not addressing it with the kind of humanity and care that you would if there was like a kinetic war. We just want to keep people out of our borders. And so anyway, there's a racial dynamic of that, but I know that we really look at, I think, the way that your region in particular has responded to the crisis and the Ukrainian refugees with a lot of both, to kind of be learning the lessons of how that's been happening, even though I know as it's dragged on, it hasn't been easy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to say it honestly, Ukrainians are very lucky that they are white and blonde and blue-eyed. But the optimistic version of this would be that once we learn how to help blonde and blue-eyed people, then maybe later on we can move on to groups of people who are less white and less blue-eyed, and that we will be able to somehow acknowledge that we are really rich and we have a lot to offer, and that people in other parts of the world are less lucky, because usually as a nation, I mean, still there is this stereotype in Slovakia especially that we are poor. And it's very funny when you ask people that, what do you think we as a nation, are we in comparison with other countries in other nations in the world, are we rich or poor or in the middle? Usually 80%, of course it depends whom you ask, but usually 80% of people would answer that Slovakia is a poor country. And I remember when our colleague Nadine Block, a fantastic activist and facilitator and trainer, when she was here in Bratislava, she was like, you are so well off, you Slovak people. You don't value many things you have, like you take it for granted, like safety and clear water and access to many public services. And that she as an American, also from East Coast, she was so much like excited by what we have here. But yes, we don't value it so much because we think it's normal. And even when people travel, they just think like it's always been like this, and it's something we have, but some other people, they have more. Germans, or I don't know, other Americans, they are richer, so we are not so rich. But this is also interesting to try to change this mindset that no, we are the rich ones in the world. We are those who
I
are
see.
well off.
Oh, sorry, Juzai, I just saw that our colleague from Seeds had raised her hands.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
My name is Eva Planovska from Seeds, a non-profit organization. We actually do civic education, which I think it's a marathon run in looking for democracy long term. Anyway, I have a question, maybe ask for a recommendation. There is a clear demand for authoritarian regime here back in Slovakia, according to all the polls, according to all the information that is gathered from the public. And you clearly mentioned that we should be against those people who push us apart, who maybe trigger the anger. But my question is whether it's not the responsibility of non-governmental society to step out of the comfort zone of non-political actors, and maybe to say out loud as well that okay, these guys or these parties, these people are not really the way to go. Whether we should, what's your recommendation? Should we do it? Should we actually be political more in order to save democracy, maybe?
What a great question. And maybe I'll put a link in the chat. So yes, is my answer, by the way, but it doesn't necessarily mean to be partisan. And this is actually what I think political is right, but it doesn't necessarily mean, because I guess what we're struggling with right now in the United States, but what the research shows about how to fight democratic decline, how to fight authoritarianism, is with a democracy movement that sees itself above any one party. And so that you actually have to then build these coalitions across ideologies, which is not easy. I'll put several things in the chat, but also to be strategic about thinking about authoritarianism as a system. Now, again, I'm speaking more from the expertise of my colleague, Maria. It's never just one charismatic leader. It's what Juza was saying in the beginning, like we thought Trump was our problem, and then, you know, he left, but the authoritarian threat, it kind of metastasized at our state level, which used to be laboratories for democracy, and now they're laboratories for autocracy, where, you know, that's where the flourishing of authoritarianism seems to be really spreading. And there's a framework, and again, I'll put this more in the chat. There's a framework called the pillars of support for authoritarianism. So this concept of, well, who is giving the moral support and the financial support and the theoretical support for the system of authoritarian actors? And usually they're within sectors of society. They're within the church or church leadership. They're within the media. They're within the business community. They're within maybe veterans or military or security sector. And if you understand that if you start to take away that support, then the pillars of the authoritarian system fall down. So you actually have to do the analysis of the strategic, both inside game and outside game. And I think that what we're finding is that when we talk about building the democracy movement outside of just civic education, because the popular education, I think, or the political education is important for people to understand how authoritarianism works. What is the playbook? Because it's actually, the playbook is exactly the same in all of these different countries. They're doing the exact, whether it's in Hungary or India or in Brazil, the playbook is the same, which means that we need our playbook. And so going on offense, but strategically making relationships within these different sectors so that there's the inside game where people who have access to those pillars of support, they start to defect. They start to say, no, this is not the way we want to go. And so they do the quiet work inside while there's pressure tactics outside. And it's not necessarily going on the street and protesting. It's different kinds of, so I have a whole bunch of stuff. If you look at the Horizons Project, we have a lot on this because this is really the focus of our work more than anything now, is helping to see how a democracy movement comes together, but above partisan politics, because that's what they want. They want you to be against them in the next election. And to have somebody to kind of push against. So we've got to have it be across ideologies that this movements come together.
Thank you very much.
And we're interested in talking more about this, by the way. I do think between Europe and the United States, we need to be sharing tactics and sharing the challenges that we have. And so I look forward to talking more about it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and Julia, if you send us the links you mentioned, that could be valuable for people who were watching this conversation, we would put it on Facebook under the recording of
Perfect.
our
yeah, I definitely will. I'm putting some things in the chat right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, the web page of the Horizon project is very interesting, and is, by the way, is beautiful. Also, I like the visual part of it as well, because
Thank you.
that's
Thank you.
very
It was
special.
fun.
Okay, so Lucy, is there anything people on Facebook want to ask?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so I just encourage whoever wants. We can, of course, we could discuss and ask each other with Julia, but I really would like to also include some of you who were just listening until now. So if not, I think we already we discussed a little bit about the inspirations from both sides, and you were mentioning, Julia, several examples of activities, how people can get together and somehow organize themselves. But maybe if you have some recent examples of initiatives or groups working actively in these ways we were mentioning, that would be also nice to maybe, if just some examples coming to your mind, to give us this flavor of how it may look like.
So what I find very inspiring is that more and more actors in the kind of civil society or social change sector have recognized the importance of our connective tissue. Like we need to be better organized. And I put a document in the chat as well. It's some of the literature, and this, again, the terminology might be problematic, but it's a concept of like, what does it mean to be a united front? So united front, or a democratic front, or like a movement that sees itself as a movement, or movements of movements in the case of the United States. And so we're practicing our collaboration muscles right now, actually. So a group came together recently in October that really reflected on, okay, well, what does a pro-democracy movement look like in this moment that is a long-term goal? It's not just electoral politics. It's not just voting, making sure we get out the vote that Biden wins again, because we can't vote our way out of this problem. And understanding what are the competencies that we need, like actually what do the skills look like? So we talked about creating these alternative systems of care. This was one of the things we talked about, but also like the intelligence. For us, for example, we have a rising political extremism movement in the US that are organizing. And, these militia, I know you've got this issue in Slovakia as well, but even like the analysis of what's happening, where there's a lot of universities who are studying this, they're on the website, they're putting out the reports. How does all this information get to the people who then are organizing with the community mediation centers so that they have the early warning system to go to the places where there's likely to be violence, to do the violence prevention? And so we're having a lot of conversations and meetings about the communications channels that we need to create, which of course is based on the trusting relationships. Just like every civil society sector out there, there's competition for resources. But I think that things are changing because we recognize we have to be more united, we have to be more together, and not just within the progressive movement. Like I keep saying. So we're having lots of meetings about united front muscles and how we practice. Like we just need to do things. And then for us, what does solidarity look like for states that are really experiencing the most extreme ramifications of the authoritarian threat. So Florida right now is an extreme case of trans kids being, well, all of the new laws and the teachers that are under threat and the militia. So national networks of civil society being in relationship with the local organizations and what do they need and how we can be supporting of them. So we have a lot of conversations about that. But you'd be interested in this PDCS. You know, so much of the literature also says one of the best ways of supporting a democracy movement is through increasing training, training skills. We need to have more citizens trained in nonviolence, in well, lots of different things actually. And so we've been bringing together groups of trainers and training centers that are multidisciplinary. Some train in mediation skills, some train in nonviolence, some more in community organizing and advocacy. Nadine was with us at this event.
Yes.
And so having a group of trainers that can also think, how can we be supporting new ideas in the curriculum? Actually, like what new things do we need to do together? And how do we support each other? Because this group of trainers came from all over the country to just talk deeply about getting more of the types of skills that we need out into the communities.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. And one last thing which came to my mind when you were mentioning communication. Very often in our conferences, in our seminars and meetings, we think about how to combine the online and offline world in this respect, because the old statement was that it's very easy to polarize or radicalize online, but it's almost impossible to de-radicalize or depolarize online. That is necessary to meet. And as you were mentioning, this care for trust and this personal ties, that how you, whether this is also something you discussing or the training covers, how to combine, because we cannot just cut out the online world. That would not be wise in the situation we are in present. So how to live with these two realities and how to combine them in a good way?
I mean, what I've found is that you can do a lot of really interesting training work online. So, our colleague Lucas was recently at an event with my new friend, Adrienne Evans from United Vision Project. I don't know if you got to attend her discussion. But she's based in Idaho, and they've been doing this amazing work because Idaho is very conservative, it's actually kind of the hotbed of extremism right now. And they had a whole program of knocking on doors, of talking to people, but now they do a training program online, but for organizers to do the work in their community. So it's the combination of sharing, but also the community that can come together to say, well, this is going well, this isn't going well. What do we do next? We're reflecting on this. So there's a lot of sense making that happens online. And then, with the very deep activism that happens in your backyard, there's another type of training that I think is very powerful, that is the whole model of calling in. Instead of calling out. Do you know what I mean? Where it's Loretta Ross is one of the famous trainers about how do you call people in to their better selves, their best selves.
I see now.
Yeah, as opposed to like, oh my gosh, you're a racist, or you're a climate change denier, and I'm outraged, and I'm gonna make you feel ashamed. We know this doesn't work.
This is not a good strategy.
But there's a whole technique of calling in people. So they say, because calling out is, we call out the call out culture
Yeah.
cancel culture.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
say it's a calling out, but with love. There's excellent trainings online, but of course, then you have to practice. You have to practice within your community. So it's both and. I now am able to be in relationship with people all over the United States, and I have Zoom calls like this all day long. But, we also have to force each other to be together in person, because that is where the relationships are built.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hope it will be possible in some time to invite you again.
I hope so too.
To Europe, and we will organize.
Please invite me. I want to come back.
Yeah, some event, and we will be again together. I believe in that very much. And yeah, I've since the time is almost over, I would like to wrap up. Thank you, Julia, very much. That was really pleasure for me, and I hope for other people too, to have this conversation. And this conversation will be recorded on Facebook, so those of you who came late or would like to watch it again, there will be this opportunity. And if you be so kind and send me in the email some other links and things we were mentioning, so that we can put all these resources under the Facebook event and the recording video, so so people can find it there very easy. Thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was lovely to see you all. Have a good day wherever you are.
Have a good day.